The question of who will control the next Dalai Lama is no longer a purely spiritual matter. It's a high-stakes geopolitical chess match between India and China, with global consequences for Tibet, Buddhism, and Asia's balance of power. You know, sometimes people don't really understand how power actually works. They assume it's just about who has the army, the border, the land, but real power, the kind that shapes civilizations, cultures, even the future, doesn't always sit in government buildings or behind military lines. Sometimes it sits in a small town at the base of the Himalayas, Dharamshala, India, where the Dalai Lama has lived in exile since 1959. Now think about that. For over 6 decades, the spiritual heart of Tibet hasn't been inside Tibet, it's been outside. Why? Because spiritual authority doesn't operate by the rules of geopolitics. You can invade a country, but you can't invade a soul. The Chinese government controls Tibet physically, yes, but they don't control what the people believe. And belief is everything in spiritual systems. It's the operating system of the human mind. Without belief, leadership is just a costume. So, let's be clear, the Dalai Lama isn't just one man. He's a symbol, a living lineage of compassion, resilience, and continuity. He represents an unbroken chain that goes back centuries. And now that chain resides in India. Not just geographically, but ideologically. India is where Tibetan culture, religion, and philosophy have been preserved, digitized, taught, and projected into the future. This isn't just spiritual refuge, this is cultural infrastructure. And in the long game, infrastructure always wins. Let's say, hypothetically, China appoints their own version of the next Dalai Lama, which they've hinted at. They use their machinery, propaganda, and institutions to say, this is the real one. Okay, sure. But here's the catch, no one will believe it. Not the Tibetan people, not the monks in the monasteries, not the global Buddhist community, and definitely not the younger generation who are growing up connected to the world, reading, watching, learning online. Because belief isn't something you can engineer in a lab or manufacture in a policy paper. It's emergent, it's emotional, it's built through trust, not control. The trust? That's in India. It's in the place where the Dalai Lama was allowed to speak freely, write, teach, meditate, laugh, where he wasn't just tolerated, he was respected. India didn't use him, they protected him. And that matters. Because in the 21st century, people care about who stands for freedom, not just who holds power. We're seeing this everywhere. In technology, in politics, in energy, in space. The new legitimacy comes from openness, from being on the right side of human progress. The Tibetan exile community in India isn't some broken remnant of the past. It's a fully functioning parallel civilization. They've preserved the ancient texts, they've built institutions, they've educated the next generation, they've created global networks, they've even used digital tools to archive their teachings and rituals. This is a civilization that didn't just survive, it adapted. That's the real revolution. And it happened in India, not in China. So when the time comes for the next Dalai Lama to be identified, and that time is coming, the world will be watching. And the decision won't just be about tradition or religion, it will be a test of where the future lies, in a system that silences people and tries to clone faith, or in a place that allowed a spiritual leader to evolve, speak, and connect with the planet. Because here's the deal, the next Dalai Lama isn't just a spiritual leader for Tibetans. He's going to be global. He'll be born into a connected world. He'll speak to climate, technology, consciousness, war and peace, human evolution. And he will matter not just for Buddhists, but for all of us navigating a world that's more complex than ever. And when that moment comes, when billions are tuning in to see who this child is, where he is recognized, where he is trained, where he is allowed to become who he is meant to be, that's when the world will see that real authority doesn't come from force. It comes from trust, legacy, and truth. And all of that right now sits in India. Look, occupying a piece of land doesn't mean you own the soul of the people who live on it. You can build highways, install surveillance, flood the area with troops and infrastructure, but none of that means you've won hearts. That's not how it works. And that's exactly what's happening in Tibet. Yes, China controls the land. They've got the borders, the checkpoints, the administrative systems, and a massive state apparatus sitting right there. But spiritual loyalty, they don't have it. Not even close. That's like trying to download love with a VPN. You can mimic the interface, but you can't copy the core. The Chinese government wants to select the next Dalai Lama, like it's just another bureaucratic appointment. They'll probably roll out a ceremonial process with a few loyal monks, create some optics, and declare to the world, this is the real Dalai Lama. But here's the problem. That's not how spiritual leadership works. You don't get moral authority by decree. You get it because people believe in you. You get it through lineage, legitimacy, and emotional connection. Historically, every time authoritarian regimes have tried to manufacture religious legitimacy, it's failed. You can't fake faith. People just don't connect with figures who are chosen by politics instead of tradition. And Tibetan Buddhists, they know the difference. Deep down, they know who's real and who's been installed. If Beijing appoints a Dalai Lama, he might sit on a throne. He might wear the robes. He might appear in state media, but he'll be spiritually invisible. A puppet with no gravity, like an AI avatar trying to replace a living, breathing monk. The world might see the picture, but the heart, the core, it won't be there. Meanwhile, the real heartbeat of Tibetan Buddhism continues outside of China's control, in India, in Nepal, in the global diaspora, in the minds of people who follow the teachings, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. That choice is everything. That's what gives a spiritual leader their fuel. That's what makes them powerful. Not tanks, not policies, but devotion. And devotion isn't programmable. You can't regulate reverence, you can suppress it. Sure, you can try to erase memory, filter the internet, shut down monasteries, but eventually, truth leaks through. And in a hyper-connected world, it leaks faster than ever. Because people are curious. They search, they learn, they compare. And when they see a Dalai Lama who was chosen under duress, behind closed doors, they'll know it's not real. The energy won't match. So yeah, China holds the physical terrain, but that's not the real territory in this game. The real terrain is psychological, emotional, cultural, and in that space, China is losing. You can't microchip the spirit. You can't surveil the soul. And you definitely can't manufacture spiritual gravity through political engineering. The world sees through it. The Tibetan people feel through it. And history, if you look closely, always ends up siding with the authentic over the artificial, always. You know, people underestimate the power of heritage, not history. Heritage. There's a difference. History is what's written in textbooks. Heritage is what lives in the hearts of people across generations. And when it comes to Buddhism, India isn't just part of the story, it is the origin code. This is where it all started. The Buddha walked here, taught here, reached enlightenment here. That legacy isn't just carved into stone at places like Bodh Gaya or Nalanda, it's coded into the spiritual DNA of half of Asia. So, if you're talking about who has the authority to recognize the next Dalai Lama, you've got to zoom out. Look beyond Tibet, beyond China, beyond the politics. Look at the entire Buddhist world, from Mongolia to Japan, Sri Lanka to Thailand, Bhutan to Nepal. What connects them isn't ideology or government, it's reverence. And that reverence flows toward India. It's like open source spirituality. The source code, the original teachings, the energy, the enlightenment, all of it came from this land. That gives India a kind of soft power that no military or economic model can replicate. It's the kind of power that doesn't shout, it resonates. Quietly, but globally. Now imagine a scenario where the Dalai Lama's next incarnation is recognized in India. That recognition wouldn't just carry political weight, it would be spiritually magnetic. Buddhist communities around the world would rally behind it, not because of geopolitical alignment, but because it feels right. Authenticity matters in these systems. India's connection to the Buddha is real, it's grounded, and that gives its endorsement unmatched legitimacy. China, on the other hand, has no such resonance. Sure, there are Buddhist temples in China, but they're filtered through layers of state control. The spiritual flow is interrupted, and that matters. It's like trying to run ancient wisdom through a firewalled operating system. The frequency gets distorted. The global Buddhist community sees that, they feel it. So, when it comes down to choosing between a Dalai Lama recognized by the birthplace of Buddhism versus one backed by a regime trying to engineer legitimacy, the choice becomes obvious. One flows with history, tradition, and spirit. The other collides with it. This isn't just about religion, it's about alignment with truth. And in the 21st century, as the world reconnects with ancient philosophies, seeks meaning beyond materialism, and turns to mindfulness, the role of Buddhism is expanding. It's becoming global again. And in that expansion, India stands as the center, not politically, but spiritually. That spiritual center gives India diplomatic leverage too. It's not coercive power, it's gravitational power. When countries respect your cultural roots, when they admire your spiritual continuity, they listen differently, they engage differently. And China knows this. That's why Beijing is trying so hard to insert itself into the Buddhist ecosystem. But it's artificial, it doesn't stick. So yes, when the next Dalai Lama is chosen, and if that recognition comes from Indian soil, from a spiritual lineage, protected by freedom not fear, it will carry serious global weight. It will isolate China, not by force, but by irrelevance. Because in matters of faith, authenticity is the ultimate authority, and on that front, India's heritage speaks louder than any propaganda machine ever could. This is the scenario that keeps Beijing up at night. Not tanks on a border, not sanctions, not even protests, but the idea of two Dalai Lamas, one selected by the Chinese Communist Party, rolled out through state media, paraded in official temples inside Tibet, and the other, chosen in exile, by monks, in freedom, with spiritual consensus, probably, on Indian soil. That's not just a religious divide, that's a narrative earthquake. Because what you'd have then is a split in legitimacy. Two parallel versions of spiritual leadership, one built on control and one built on continuity. One speaking in carefully scripted Mandarin press statements, the other connecting directly with believers across the globe, one under surveillance, the other under the stars. This is not a hypothetical, it already happened with the Panchen Lama, the second most important figure in Tibetan Buddhism. In 1995, the Dalai Lama recognized a young boy as the true reincarnation. Days later, that boy disappeared, gone, vanished into the machinery of the state. Then Beijing installed its own official version of the Panchen Lama, and guess what? Tibetan Buddhists rejected him, completely. To them he's not real, he's a mannequin wearing robes. Now amplify that scenario, but with the Dalai Lama, the spiritual face of Tibetan identity, the global icon, the peaceful warrior. Imagine two versions, one with political backup, and one with spiritual authenticity. In the long run, which one do you think the world will follow? You can't force reverence. You can't legislate loyalty. People follow what they feel, not what they're told. And here's the geopolitical twist. This division doesn't just challenge China inside Tibet, it fractures their global Buddhist diplomacy. Countries like Mongolia, Thailand, Bhutan, and even parts of Southeast Asia are watching. If they see a split, they'll gravitate toward the leader who feels legitimate. That's probably not the one giving press conferences from Beijing. It also puts India in a very powerful position, because if the Dalai Lama's successor is found, trained, and guided in India, that makes India the custodian of continuity, the home of the true spiritual lineage. And that matters in diplomacy, in soft power, in narrative control. China wants to dominate the story, but a dual Dalai Lama situation makes that story chaotic, messy, divided, uncertain, and uncertainty weakens authoritarian control. What does China lose in that moment? Not just face, they lose control over the most potent symbolic weapon in Tibetan identity. The Dalai Lama isn't just a monk. He's the memory of a free Tibet, the voice of nonviolent resistance, a living reminder that truth doesn't bend just because a regime wants it to. So yeah, a dual Dalai Lama is Beijing's nightmare, because it's not just about religion, it's about narrative, legitimacy, global optics. If two versions of the same sacred lineage exist, one imposed, one embraced, the whole system China's been trying to build in Tibet starts to look artificial, it unravels. And the world will notice, not immediately maybe, but over time the truth always scales faster than force. You can tell a lot about how the world works by watching who speaks out and who stays silent. Over the last few years, something subtle but very important has happened. The US and several key Western nations have started drawing a line when it comes to Tibet, not with loud declarations, not with flashy headlines, but with legislation, policy shifts, and quiet alignment. And what they're saying in effect is this: China doesn't get to pick the next Dalai Lama. That's a big deal, because for decades, a lot of countries didn't want to touch the Tibet issue. It was too sensitive, too risky. China's economic leverage made people cautious, but now that's changing. Laws like the Tibetan Policy and Support Act in the US explicitly say the decision about reincarnation belongs to the Tibetan people, not the Chinese Communist Party. That's not just symbolic, that's strategic alignment. And make no mistake, these moves aren't being made in isolation. They're part of a broader recalibration. The West is reassessing its approach to China, and in that reassessment, India is emerging as the partner of choice, especially when it comes to shared values like religious freedom, open societies, and rule of law. Supporting India's role in the Dalai Lama succession isn't just about Tibet, it's about choosing a future where spiritual traditions aren't engineered by authoritarian states. Think about the implications. If the next Dalai Lama is recognized in India and the US, Europe, Japan, and others back that recognition, it creates a global consensus that completely sidelines China's version. Even if Beijing installs its own appointee, he'll be seen as a state creation, not a spiritual leader. His reach will be limited, his influence contained. Meanwhile, India's chosen successor will travel, teach, and gain followers across free societies. And here's the long-term view: this kind of support locks in India's position as the guardian of Tibetan culture and religion. That's not just moral high ground, it's geopolitical leverage. Because in a world where soft power matters more than ever, being the protector of an ancient and respected spiritual lineage carries serious weight. This also fits into a larger pattern. The world is shifting from a unipolar system to a multipolar one. Power is getting distributed. Trust is becoming a currency. And in that environment, countries are looking for allies who are principled, not just powerful. India, by offering asylum to the Dalai Lama and protecting Tibetan identity for decades, has earned that trust, not by force, by integrity. So, when Western democracies back India on the Dalai Lama issue, they're not just poking China, they're making a bet that open systems are more resilient than closed ones. That spiritual continuity matters more than state control, and that in the long run, the truth doesn't just survive, it prevails. That's what makes India's role so unique. It's not just that it holds the moral position, it's that it now holds the strategic one too. Supported by allies, respected by Buddhists worldwide, and trusted by the Tibetan people. And that combination? That's something China can't replicate, no matter how many laws it passes or officials it appoints. Here's the thing, people often forget, in spiritual matters, authority doesn't come from control. It comes from freedom. You don't earn devotion by suppressing it. You earn it by trusting it, nurturing it, giving it space to breathe. And that's exactly the difference between how India and China are handling the legacy of the Dalai Lama. Let's be real. China has the physical control over Tibet, but what does that control look like? It's surveillance cameras on monastery walls, internet blackouts, monks monitored, teachings filtered, loyalty tested. The whole spiritual ecosystem is wired into a state system that doesn't understand the language of faith. It's trying to regulate something that fundamentally resists regulation. Now compare that to what's happening in India. The Dalai Lama has lived there for over 6 decades, and not just lived, but flourished. He speaks freely. He teaches without censors. He meets world leaders, scientists, school kids, tech entrepreneurs. He laughs. He writes. He travels. That freedom has become part of his message, and people see it. Because when someone is speaking from a place of inner peace, clarity, and independence, you can feel it. It carries weight. And when someone else is speaking from a position where every word has been vetted, scripted, or imposed, people feel that too. It's the difference between genuine light and a flashlight with dying batteries. So yes, India holds the spiritual high ground, not just because it hosts the Dalai Lama, but because it lets him be himself. That matters. In a world flooded with artificiality, people are looking for something real, and real spirituality needs room. It needs contradiction. It needs evolution. It needs freedom to grow. India offers that. China, at least in its current system, doesn't. And this contrast, it's not abstract. It shows up in global perception. You ask a Buddhist in Japan, or Sri Lanka, or California, or Berlin, who do they believe has the authentic Dalai Lama lineage? 9 out of 10 times, they'll point to the one who's teaching in freedom, not the one whose every move is stage managed. That difference, it multiplies over time. It turns into credibility, into influence, into soft power. Spirituality isn't about who has the most temples or the biggest statues. It's about resonance. And resonance comes from authenticity. That authenticity is thriving in India, because India didn't try to own it. It just gave it room. And honestly, that's the ultimate irony. China's trying so hard to control the narrative, but in doing so, it's weakening it. Meanwhile, India, by stepping back and letting the Dalai Lama simply be, has created a space where the message grows organically. No force, just flow. So when the question comes up, who should recognize the next Dalai Lama, the answer won't come from political meetings or committee votes. It'll come from the world's collective intuition, from a million quiet conversations, prayers, meditations. And in that space, freedom speaks louder than any state directive. India didn't just give the Dalai Lama a place to live, it gave him a platform to remain real. And in the world of spirit, that's everything. At the end of the day, power isn't what decides the future of a spiritual tradition. Trust does, and trust can't be commanded, bought, or enforced. It's earned, slowly, quietly, over time. And if you look at the Tibetan people, both those in exile and those still living inside Tibet, it's clear who they trust. It's not Beijing, it's India. Why? Because trust comes from consistency, from protection, from dignity. India didn't just offer the Dalai Lama a place to hide, it offered the Tibetan people something infinitely more valuable, the ability to preserve who they are, their faith, their language, their schools, their rituals, their memories. That kind of refuge isn't just geographical, it's psychological. It tells an entire community, you still exist. Meanwhile, what has China offered? Re-education, surveillance, cultural erasure disguised as modernization. The message has been, you can exist, but only if you stop being you. That's not trust. That's coercion. And people can feel the difference, even if they can't say it out loud. Even inside Tibet, where speech is monitored, and fear is the norm, loyalty hasn't vanished. It's gone underground. People still keep photos of the Dalai Lama hidden in drawers. They whisper his name. They pray in silence. That kind of devotion is resilient. You can't eliminate it with censorship. You only make it more powerful. And outside Tibet, in the refugee communities across India, Nepal, Europe, North America, you'll find generations of Tibetans who were raised under India's protection. These are not broken people. They're educated, active, culturally intact, globally connected. They were given a second chance, and they know exactly who gave it to them. That shapes loyalty, not just to the Dalai Lama, but to the nation that gave him, and them, safety. So, when the time comes to recognize the next Dalai Lama, the Tibetan people already know who they'll believe. It won't be a name printed in a Chinese newspaper. It will be the one who comes through the process they recognize, the one selected in freedom, the one whose environment reflects the teachings, not contradicts them. That's where India comes in. It's not trying to control Tibetan Buddhism, it's just letting it breathe. And that permission, that respect, is exactly why the Tibetan people trust it. It's not just about where the next Dalai Lama is found. It's about who allows him to be what he is meant to be. So yes, governments can make declarations. Officials can pose with robed appointees. But when it comes to real belief, it doesn't matter what's said from the podium. It matters what's felt in the heart. And for Tibetans, after decades of watching, learning, remembering, that heart points to India. Not out of convenience, not out of strategy, but out of gratitude, out of experience. Because the one truth you can't fake is this: people always remember who stood with them when it mattered most. So, who will control the next Dalai Lama? In a material sense, China may claim the throne, but in the spiritual realm where the Dalai Lama's power truly lies, in hearts, prayers, and beliefs, the answer is clear. India holds the soul, China only the shadow.